Oh, okay. Excellent. So, my name is Danica Rhines. I am the Senior Manager of Communications and Media Relations here with Columbia Association. I've been here since the August of the pandemic, so August 2020. And it is my pleasure to be kind of your tour guide through tonight's presentation. We will go over kind of the overall agenda for tonight, if you will. I do expect this to move pretty swiftly, but of course we will have time for questions as well. So, we really know the term budget doesn't always spark a huge amount of excitement for folks. So we really appreciate you all being here, whether you were here with us live or maybe watching a little bit later when this is posted. Just know that it is valued, and thank you for seeing the value and importance of the investments that we make here at Columbia Association and for engaging in that process. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started here, because some of you may be familiar with Zoom webinars, some of you may not, but the first thing you may notice is you aren't able to turn on your camera. Hopefully you see this as an opportunity to kick back and wear some comfy clothes, some pajamas, get in the couch and get comfy and cozy for what we're about to get into here tonight. This session, as I mentioned, is being recorded and it will be posted for anyone who can't make it here tonight. So I will do my best to get everybody on this call, or at least who was registered, a link to that so you can pass it along. As I mentioned, we will have time for question and answer, Q&A, with the panelists that we have here today, the individuals. I ask that you would use the Q&A function. So if you're not familiar with that, it is not the chat, the one speech bubble. It is the double speech bubble that says Q&A underneath it. That just allows us to keep better track of what we have and have not answered. It's just a better functionality capability that Zoom has. So please use that one if you can. We may not get to every question tonight. I expect us to get to a lot, but in the case that we don't, I do my best to moderate and combine as many questions as possible, pull out common themes so we can keep things moving and respect everyone's time as well. I also ask that on behalf of everyone's time that we keep things on topic. So please, if you have another question or concern to bring up, we have multiple avenues to do that. Tonight really is about this FY25 budget process, as well as some of the priorities. If you still have questions after the session too, of course, reach out to us. So without further ado, let's get started here. So tonight's agenda, again, my name is Danica. I am the moderator here. We're going to have a brief introduction by Dennis. We'll turn it over to him in just a moment. I'm going to run through a few things about CA, a high-level overview. Susan Krabbe, our Senior Vice President and CFO, will provide some framework and a summary around the budget itself. And then we will open it up for that Q&A. And then I will cover briefly some next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Dennis to just kind of introduce us and introduce the evening.
Thank you, Danica. CA's mission revolves around improving the quality of life for everyone in Columbia, but we can't truly know if we are serving our community unless we hear from you. Over the past few years, we've made a concerted effort to increase engagement around the budget process because we believe that our investments should be a reflection of the people in the community. As you'll see from the presentation tonight, our team is a steward of almost an $80 million budget. And I'm so incredibly proud of the finance team that's been heading this up. Susan Krabbe was named one of the top CFOs in Maryland, along with the CFO from Under Armour, Johns Hopkins, Black & Decker. Great job, Susan. It speaks to the high quality of team members we have. We had a seat at the table at the White House to talk about sustainability. We have a very high level of team members that we engage in the budget process. I'm proud of everything we do for Columbia, but the needs of the people are constantly evolving, and we need to change the budget to keep up with that. That's why staying engaged is so important. The more people we hear from, the more representative our investments are, so your participation is vital. We appreciate that you're spending your time with us tonight, and hope that you will continue to stay engaged in the budget process as we move forward. Thank you.
Awesome. Dennis, thank you so much. All right, moving on here. So if you are not familiar, if you are not familiar with this process, this is an excellent overview of what has already happened and what's to come as well. So you are looking at the fiscal year 2025 budget timeline. What does that mean? Well, we go from May to April at this organization, May to April. So right now we are considering May of 2024 to April of 2025. We call that our fiscal year 2025 budget. So you can see here, the first round of feedback happened in primarily in August. That was a survey where we really gauged the community's priorities for CA and how the organization serves Columbia at large. Our board of directors took that feedback, factored it into their set of priorities, and you'll hear about those a little later in this information session. And so we're now in the midst of a couple things going on in terms of engagement. We have a second round of online surveying, public input around this budget. That wraps up tomorrow, but you all get the sneak peek. I think we're going to extend it through the weekend, so you have a little bit of time to spread that amongst your friends and neighbors. So we also had a board discussion last week around these topics, and of course, tonight's information session. So the board will have another conversation next week. I have a big screen up here, by the way, so I talk with my hands. If you see me going up here, it's because I'm pointing to something you can see, but you can't. So we have another discussion next week, followed by a vote in December. That vote in December sets the parameters for CA staff in developing the draft budget. And then that draft budget is the one that the board will consider, possibly tweak and vote on in February. So you can see that hopefully in this timeline. This is also accessible on our website if you need to revisit this. And one of the things we try to get across pretty clearly is the sooner you get involved in this process, the more likely it is that your input will really make a difference. And that's because as we go through the process, things become a little bit more solidified. You might have heard, priorities, high level things first, and then we morph into a little more concrete and a little more concrete as we keep going. All right, so CA today, some of you may have differing levels of familiarity with our organization, right? So we wanted to go through some basics. That way we're all on the same page heading into the numbers. So let's start with who we serve. Columbia would be the second biggest city in the state of Maryland if it were incorporated. So the population, as many of you well may know, is about 105,000 people. We are a majority minority community, something to keep in mind. Additionally, excuse me, sorry, there might be some odd feedback. Are you guys? No, I just want to make sure that we have approximately 5,800 businesses in our community and 96,000 or so employees across the community as well. In terms of CA, we have about 18,000 memberships last fiscal year and then 5,900 Columbia card holders. If you're unfamiliar with the Columbia card, those can be applied for by anyone who lives on CA assessed property. And that applies to both members and non-members, and that gives access to some services that we provide and amenities that we provide here at CA. And then this is huge. I think people don't always know about just the breadth and the reach of some of our programming. We saw almost 2 million visits to our facilities last year. You'll hear more about how that's kind of broken down later in the presentation. But that includes, as you can see here, almost 1 million check-ins, or excuse me, more than 1 million check-ins at sports and recreation facilities across CA. That's about 970,000 check-ins at our fitness clubs. We saw a 70% increase in visits to our Columbia Arts Center last fiscal year compared to the year before. We have seen a record-breaking winter at the ice rink as well. A lot of things going on. Dennis, I apologize. I'm hearing you can't hear me. Can everybody else hear me okay?
I'm back.
Okay,
So.
just wanted to make sure. Okay. Excellent. We also very proud that we increased fourfold in visits to the Youth and Teen Center last fiscal year. That's more than 400%. And then golf and racquetball, and of course, pickleball, folks, that continues to do get insane participation. So just kind of this is a numbers snapshot of who we serve here in the community. Next, we're going to cover a couple of areas, and I'm going to try to breeze through this pretty quickly, but we have two primary departments that are external facing. So the ones you probably interface with in some way, shape, or form if you're familiar with CA. So community operations is the first we're going to cover. That's first, we have our parks, pathways, and play areas. You may know them as tot lots. So the maintenance and capital projects associated with all of that infrastructure throughout the community, that is covered in that. Facility services is all of CA's buildings, but we also help maintain and repair and support the 10 villages and the village associations who CA actually owns those buildings and the plazas as well, but villages deliver services out of those facilities. We help maintain the actual properties. Event services, a lot of people think of our lakefront. So you'll see pictures of the movie nights with Mr. B, as well as Festive Fridays, and the fourth at the bottom there. However, some people may not know that CA supports a number of events throughout the community with, equipment and presence and things like that. That is just part of what we do each and every day to support the community. Sustainability, maybe you or someone you know is involved with Weed Warriors or Adopt a Spot or Stream Waiters. That's some of the volunteer programs that we have in this department, but this spans a lot of different areas. Planting trees, energy efficiency, you name it. And one of the things that Dennis briefly mentioned that I wanted to point out as well is we are an inaugural partner of the Better Climate Challenge. That means CA as an organization is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% over the next decade. Then there's the Better Buildings Challenge, which very impressively, Jeremy Scharfenberg, who is on this call here, went to the White House recently to be recognized for CA's commitment to reducing our energy use through myriad of tactics. 32% down from when we committed to that effort and that initiative. So we are very proud of that as well. But we're talking everything, as you can see here, from solar to wind credits. We're almost carbon, we're getting closer and closer every day to a carbon neutral footprint, making changes to electric vehicles and everything in between. Community development and real estate services. So think for a second just about the scale and the different layers of, land ownership that CA has. And so this is really an important piece of what we do in interacting with some members of our community who need to, we work with residents on surveying, we interact a lot with the Department of Planning and Zoning and the county. Because we are a master planned community here, that means a lot of different things. So keeping track of all of that, making sure that the easements in our land use and things like that are all being followed, etc. Then we turn it over to community programs and services. And this is where a lot of folks, again, that almost 2 million visits, this is where all of that is centered right here. So first you've got wellness and fitness. A lot of people think of us in this way. We really do this in a competitive way. We have a diversity of programming from, you can see in the bottom corner, Pilates studio over at Columbia Gym, aerial yoga, you name it. I think I've seen it on our schedule. So we're also making strides, though, and very intentional strides toward making wellness more accessible to the entire community, whether you're a member or not, and really getting out of the confines of our fitness clubs and getting into the communities. These are things like Walk with a Doc, which is something we do every month. Columbia Moves with CA. You can see a lot of our wellness and fitness instructors out at Dancing Under the People Tree or other events in the community. So that is really an intentional effort to try and, again, bring wellness and health to our community in a more equitable and inclusionary way. Sports and rec, that includes our 23 outdoor pools, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, as well as our indoor pools, tennis, golf, skate and sports park, as well as the ice rink. And then rounding out the community programs and services area, we have our youth and teen programs as well. And those include our Youth and Teen Center, year-round programming through the school age services, before and after school care, as well as some other programs as well. In the realm of arts and culture, if you have never been over to the Columbia Art Center, I highly encourage it. It is an amazing facility. A lot of people really don't know there's a lot of free exhibits there as well. Gallery shows, fused glass, ceramics. I could go on and on about that one. And then in terms of multicultural programming, you can see a few examples on here. At the top, we have one of our grocery store tours. We do some, international grocery store visits where there's a curated list of things and exploring different kind of grocery stores and then creating a recipe together at the end. And then at the bottom there is just a snapshot, I should say, of our Latin dance night that we had earlier this summer, which was fantastic and a lot of fun. And last but certainly not least, the archives, the Columbia, Maryland archives. If you have not visited, this is a resource for anyone and everyone. It is not just for researchers. We have amazing folks who work and pretty much live in this space of really preserving the history of Columbia. So, feel free to reach out. And also they collect artifacts and as well to make sure that we are continuing to preserve the history of this unique community. So lastly, from me, this is, we just saw a lot of pictures, and this is just a different way of looking at it. So this is really, telling in numbers form how CA shows up in the community. When we were talking about our open space and our pathways, 3,600 acres of open space. Some people are amazed to hear that. 95 miles of pathways. We have, 8 public tennis and pickleball courts along with the clubs. So this is, again, just a different way of looking at what we just discussed there. And all of the different moving parts and pieces of CA, because it can be a lot to wrap your brain around. So I would also recommend, just a quick plug, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about CA at large, we have an annual report that comes out every year. This one came out in July, and that is available on the budget page. We will flash up that URL later on in this presentation, so feel free to check that out. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Susan, who is going to, really review the budget process and what we're looking at for this upcoming fiscal year.
Great. Thank you, Danica. And thank you all for being present this evening and for giving your time later if you're watching this after it's been recorded. So I really appreciate your interest in Columbia Association, especially in how this organization stewards the resources that you all entrust to us. So just to hit the high points of the framework for our budget process. So we have 3 kind of budget categories. We're listening and prioritizing. That's what the summer engagement survey was all about. And now we're in the middle of the process, sort of synthesizing everything, pulling it together and analyzing it. So we can move on to the next slide. So just to give some perspective, especially since what we've been as a worldwide community really through a lot the last few years with the COVID pandemic and the uncertainty, the way the world has changed and what uncertainty there is around the future outlook. But just wanted to help everyone see where CA is at the starting point. So we really have become a much more nimble and a leaner organization today than we were before the pandemic. We now clearly have several years of demonstrating a solid ability to manage expenses to revenue. Revenue continues to recover, costs continue to increase as participation grows, but also as with inflationary pressure. We've worked very hard on process improvements that have improved operational efficiency and have reduced costs. And we've reinforced our commitment to the community in engagement platforms and methods that inform our programming to help make sure we deliver what the community values. So as I mentioned, the global economy is markedly different. I think most of us know that inflation is starting to creep down from literally a 40-year high. that prices for things that matter a lot to all of us, in energy, food, housing, wages have increased significantly over the past 2 years. Interest rates are the highest they've been in decades. So the Fed met this week. They didn't raise the rates, but they've done it 11 times since March of 2022. We still think, most people think there might be one more. They're going to meet in the middle of December, and we'll see. Most economists are still anticipating a recession in calendar year 2024. And the supply chain challenges continue to persist, and they vary, and it's often just very random. The types of things that are impacted by supply chain constraints vary almost monthly. And we also continue to struggle with staffing and recruiting, particularly for customer-facing positions. Some key comparisons, and this is not strictly apples to apples. You'll see it's not, each one of these is not over the same time period, but I just thought it was important to provide sort of an order of magnitude guide for some of the factors that are impacting Columbia Association and the community at large. So the Consumer Price Index is up almost 18% over 2 years, since calendar year 2021 through 23. Howard County minimum wage was $11.75 an hour at the end of 2021. It's $15 an hour now. That's almost 20%, 28% change. And that is moving to $16 in January 2025. So, I'm sorry, 24. So we made a compression adjustment. We adjusted, other wages around that in FY22 because of the impact to the rest of our workforce. The annual charge income, on the other hand, has increased 8.3% over the period I noted from FY21 through FY24. So that's an average of about 2.8% a year. And then membership rates, our average rate guidance was 4% for those for 23 and 24. In FY22, we made no change to the play membership, and a less than a 3% increase for some of the others. Last year it was 3%, and the current year we're like 3 to 5%. You can see that that is not anywhere near where we are with inflation. So CA wide, I'm going to kind of move through these next couple slides. We'll talk about that. The material that we posted on the website provides a really in-depth view of the organization-wide, basically profit and loss statement, P&L. So you can see detailed line items for the types of revenue that we earn and the specific expenses that we that go into funding the operation. So I encourage you to look at that. We're not going to put up slides with lots of teeny little numbers, but we will talk about our budget priorities. So in September 20, just last month, well, 2 months ago now, at their September 28th board meeting, the CA board voted on these 7 strategic priorities for the FY25 budget. So they had a robust discussion over a couple of meetings, several hours, and came up with their priorities for us to incorporate into the budget that we build for them and for the community. So first is infrastructure. They want to ensure that we have a plan to take care of each critical area and that we fund it. That there's an emphasis on accessibility, especially for residents. However, there are multiple options or alternatives for increasing accessibility, and one of those being to make it easier for folks to engage with Columbia Association. And affordability, the goal was to make sure that living in Columbia is more affordable by maximizing the value for your investment, and also just monitoring the impact on the annual charge. We're going to continue with the board's direction to maintain this high level of focus and attention to environmental priorities. Staff training, we want to be an employer of choice in Howard County, and that includes not just training, but efforts related to recruitment, DEI initiatives. Grants, we're going to continue a grant funding program and ensure finally that we fund the existing strategic plan. So there are more external factors that I think are important to acknowledge, in part so that you see that we are thoroughly evaluating the impact of external factors on Columbia and Columbia Association. So we've looked at, we're facing increasing regulatory complexity, from everything to environmental requirements for swimming pools, to accounting requirements for leases, and HR regulatory changes related to compensation, to leave and benefits, to 401k plans. The Howard County minimum wage, again, I mentioned it's going to increase again, and I was on January 1 of 2025, so we will not have experienced that in the current fiscal year, but we need to factor it into the budget that we're talking about tonight. So that's a move from $15 to $16. That's another 7% increase. And our workforce is evolving. You know, we have a lot of experienced workers in all areas of the organization who will be looking to retire at some point. We want to support and not just support, but embrace and encourage diversity across all of our functional teams. And we are struggling, as I noted before, as are many, many other employers, with engaging customer-facing staff. And then we have a challenge that might be a little bit unique to CA. We have it with insurance. We have many wood structures. Most of our buildings are wood framed, and insurance companies don't like that. And so we just got word last week that we should expect a 25% increase just on our property insurance for next year. So we have to consider those things and make sure that we're adequately covered, and that we're just good stewards of our resources. So one major assumption that I'm sure matters to all of you is that we don't anticipate any change to the annual charge. We would not recommend that be increased. And I did want to point out that we continue to be 9% lower than on the rate side, 68 cents, and the maximum allowable amount of 75. And on the cap side, we're at 35% of the max. It's 10% according to the legislation, but we're at 3.5%. So Danica did a great job explaining what's in community operations and how it's supported. So I'll just hit some of the major assumptions that are included in that we used in determining developing this pre-budget work that we have posted. So the community operations team has increased funding for keeping things clean, from pathways and trash, and the lakes for aquatic weed, vegetation harvesting, and ongoing maintenance. We're expanding tree planting, and that matters to so many people in our community. The reforestation efforts are increasing, and the focus on invasive plant removal, with the addition of a full-time person, a full-time position to focus on that. We're going to increase our in-house maintenance of play areas, and the play areas, pathways, and bridges, in large part because we just can't keep up with it with the use of contractors. So we're proposing adding 3 positions to that functionality. And then we need to do a yearly dam and pond safety inspections. So of course that's covered. We want to do some facility assessments. Those are studies that are done of our large buildings to inform and drive our long-term capital investments. And then we're going to continue to support and hopefully even enhance Lakefront Live, July 4th programming, and the other community event support that we do. Festive Fridays is coming up, and just making sure that the community has a lot of free and fun activities, and that's to achieve and hopefully really expand on the goal of accessibility. And Danica did a great job, and the pictures were awesome for community programs and services. So this part of the organization has some just real complexity. So we do these programs and services that are at a nonprofit and through a nonprofit lens, but we compete head on with organizations in the community that provide some of these programs and services for-profit basis and have a lot of resources to throw at it. So Dan and his team do a great job. We're proposing the pre-budget work that we've done to date assumes that all 23 outdoor pools will open with the full CNSL season. Now, this is what we have factored in at this point. It could change, just, in the interest of complete and full disclosure, because we really struggled to deliver that last year from a staffing perspective. So more to come on that. We're working really hard on that even today even. The Art Center is going to get a long overdue renovation, so they'll close at least partially for a couple months for that. We expect to just do a small increase in most memberships rates, and we'll continue to emphasize value for residents in that equation. And we're assuming a 3% increase in total members compared to FY24, continuing to build back from the COVID pandemic shutdown. School age services will be open in all 20 schools. We expect 30 kids in each session. Again, that will be largely dependent on our success in staffing those roles. And as Danica mentioned, we really want to support the community and its wellness goals. And so we want to add a half a position, convert a part-time position to full-time for community wellness. Okay, so let's get into the numbers, my favorite part. So the annual charge, people frequently ask, well, how is my annual charge money used? And this is a great snapshot of how it is, how we would expect it to be used in FY25. So on the left, in the bright green, there's the annual charge number. It's the biggest block. It's almost $48 million. There's a little bitty purple line above that. That's interest and other income. That number actually shows up now because interest rates are so high. In previous years, it would hardly have registered on the graph. And then on the right, you can see how those dollars are used. The biggest single user is community operations, and that's the support of our open space, sustainability, event services, and facilities and buildings. Next is capital. So this is the reinvestment in those facilities, buildings, and amenities. Village associations, those are your village community association. That's the support that Columbia Association provides on a monetary basis. It does not factor in things like the rent-free use of the buildings or anything like that. This is really the dollars that go to the community associations. And then we have to repay our debt. So Columbia Association has some long-term debt, and in FY25, the scheduled repayment of that is $5.2 million. We do have, since the pandemic and in the middle of that time period, the CA board established emergency cash reserve program and policy, and we've been incrementally funding that to meet the goals of that program. So we propose an additional $3 million into that fund. So if you're looking for community programs and services and how much of your annual charge dollars goes to support that department, yes, thank you, Danica. It's that nice sky blue bar there, $2,394,000, about 5% of the annual charge income. And the other two numbers are the president's office and administration. All right, another, now this a little bit similar, but this is a look at how the total income on the left is used by the various functions and CA needs on the right. So on the left, you see, again, the annual charge. We show it again in a nice big green bucket, but you see that community programs and services is a significant component of our total income as well. So total income is about budgeted to be $83 million. Of that, we project community programs and services bringing in about $32.7 million. You see on the other side, Danica drew a nice bright blue arrow on there to show the corresponding expenses. And you see, from a visual standpoint, there's not much difference there. And that's because the community programs and services are almost funding 93% of their expenses. And that's great results when you think about there are things in that department's purview that don't earn any revenue at all or generate any revenue at all, like the archives and the teen center, international programs, etc. Okay. So how much, so what does it look like in the shape of a pie? Oh, and I should have mentioned that on each of these slides, we do show in a little green box with white letters where that you can find this particular image graph. Thanks, Danica, in the post-it materials. So residential annual charge, 36.9% of the CA's revenue. That's about $30 million, $30.8 million. So we would expect that to be the biggest piece. And we often think about the CA is highly dependent on the annual charge. It's 2/3 of our income, a little bit less now, but the community programs and services team is generating almost $33 million. So now they're back, coming back from COVID, and now have exceeded the residential annual charge as far as how the income that's generated for CA. All right. So projected outcomes, CA-wide bottom line of about $3.5 million. That would be the increase in net assets. So that's the excess of revenues over expenses for the year. That's a nice number. Our lenders would be satisfied with that and would not cause them any angst. So that would be great. Community programs and services, it's an annual charge subsidy. We talked about that. And about $2.4 million. Community operations, I won't go through those numbers again because I showed them before. One big investment in administrative services that will impact, hopefully, accessibility and just customer and team member and resident experiences with CA is a planned implementation of a new customer relationship management tool. So big project, starting that in this fiscal year, but the goal is to go live next fiscal year in FY25. And then proposed capital budget, we are proposing $13 million, and we do this very carefully. We've projected our cash flow needs over the next 2 years, making sure that we manage the inflows and projected outflows. We came up with $13 million as something that's manageable by CA. It does not drive us to incur or have to issue any long-term debt. And so it's a good solid number. It's an 18% increase over the past year. So that's helpful. We're moving back to our pre-COVID spending levels, investment levels. And in addition to that, there's $1,650,000 for 3 projects that we are hoping to receive government grant funding for. So the total investment would actually be $14,650,000 if we receive the grant funding that we are hoping for.
Susan, can I backtrack on you for just 1 second?
Sure.
So the one other thing that I found fascinating, in learning more about our organization is really this dark blue piece of this pie, which folks may not all the time recognize, which is that about a fifth, 21%, 22% of our budget, of our revenue, comes from commercial annual charge. So it's important to remember that our friends that own businesses or own property here are contributing greatly to our quality of life as well.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I should also note that in that commercial, what CA considers commercial are the apartment communities. So rental property owners are part of that piece of the pie as well. Thanks. All right, so I hit the highlights of that in the next page. Here we are getting into a lot of detailed little numbers. I did want to point out that this is just the summary, and in the materials that are published online, you can actually see what the projects are that we're proposing that align with these summary categories here. So we were really thoughtful in what we proposed to make sure that it aligned with the community input received to date. So the community, by and large, is much more interested in Columbia Association maintaining what we have rather than investing in new amenities. So people like what they're used to and want them to be well taken care of. So we've incorporated that here, and we've also factored in and leaned on the board's strategic priorities. So many of these you will see have an environmental goal have in infrastructure improvement or maintenance goals are about affordability to make things less expensive to run, such as the energy retrofits and the HVAC system replacements. And many of them affect accessibility also. We want to do a Columbia Gateway outdoor fitness area if we get the grant dollars for that. We want to put in a band shell at the lakefront, again, if we get some grant funding. And we're also committed to the Stonehouse and Art Center renovation to improve accessibility to that facility as well. So just singling those out, but many of these reflect an emphasis on better community accessibility. And then just some reflections on this, as I mentioned, it's an improvement over prior years. It's up from FY24 and beyond and prior. It does cover our normal maintenance, and it fully funds most asset replacement cycles, not all of them, but most. For example, the pathways, our team would prefer a 25-year replacement cycle. This budget puts us at about a 30-year replacement cycle. It aligns with community input, again, as I mentioned, where members of the community seem to prioritize maintaining what we have versus adding new. And it reflects our concerns about rising interest rates and potential impact of economic issues on the Columbia Association. So just maintaining just a prudence around the possibility of incurring debt. And then we already talked about that. Some funding is subject to government grants. So that's it. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And again, I would encourage you to look at the material online. I would ask that you take some time and read the overview. It provides a lot of good background information, some of what was covered here, but in more detail if you're interested. So thank you for your attention.
Susan, thank you. And I went ahead and dropped in the chat. Everybody should be able to see the direct link to the pre-budget workbook. So that is the document that Susan is referring to. And again, we'll have a QR code up with all of the budget information as well here in a second. The only question I have is from Joel. He was wondering about the impact of the 10% increase in water and sewer for 3 years and what that's countywide, according to Joel, and what we're anticipating there.
So I would have to look at that, Joel, to make sure that we've fully factored that in. But we did estimate a higher increase than normal for those utilities because they have been outpacing inflation. But we'll take a look at that and make sure that in the next iteration of these numbers that's adequately factored in.
And please forgive me, I never introduced Jeremy Scharfenberg and Dan Burns here tonight. I meant to do that at the top of the program here, but Dan is the Vice President of Community Programs and Services, and Jeremy Scharfenberg is the Interim Director of Community Operations here at CA. I am not seeing any other questions. Please throw them in. I'll start, I want to respect everyone's time, and I know it's around dinner time as well. So I can kind of start the next steps conversation. And if a question comes up, great. If not, no problem. So this is one way of looking at the next steps that we have, or the past and next steps of how this budget process has gone. So we saw that more detailed timeline. But if you think about, what we're trying to achieve in each of these steps, this is just another way of visualizing it, right? So the strategic priorities that Susan went over in an earlier slide, putting those out there, making sure we have visibility on those. We're asking the community about their priorities. We're coming back to the board. And then again, those outcomes that will come into play over the next couple of months, we'll go back to staff. And that's how we get to our draft recommendations that come out in January. And then I just wanted to give one more look at this timeline and where we're headed next. So again, November 9th is the next discussion for the budget and where we're headed next. December 14th is one of those voting moments. So that's really setting our team up to draft that compile that draft budget and make sure it's out in the public. We will have another round of online feedback in January. And then on January 25th, we encourage folks to either listen in virtually or come out to the board meeting that happens then. They will be discussing the actual draft budget at that point in time. And then just a work session to discuss once again, and then the approval will happen on February 22nd. I should point out too, this is a board approved timeline. This is not one that is completely construed by staff and we say, go do it. It's something that was mutually agreed upon. So important to point out. So as I mentioned, board meetings next, resident speak out, always an option for everybody. And then this QR code goes straight to the online survey that we have active right now. So I will pause for just a couple of seconds in case you haven't gotten around to taking that yet. Feel free to go ahead and make your voice heard in that way. We certainly want to provide that opportunity. This link as well is also available on the budget page on CA's website, which is right here, columbiaassociation.org/budget. So pretty easy to get to and remember. Again, columbiaassociation.org/budget. And just a few takeaways other than, the nitty gritty numbers, because that is not my world and that is Susan's, and thank goodness it is. But I hope this also helped really kind of put in perspective that, parts and pieces of CA standing alone maybe aren't so unique, but having it all together in one place with the clear mission of enhancing quality of life here in our community, that is special. And I hope you feel that. I hope you see that in some of these numbers and graphs and things like that. Sometimes it's hard to pull that out of it, but it's true. This is truly a representation of our priorities and hopefully of yours as well. And really, we're going to keep asking for your feedback, as Dennis mentioned earlier on in this presentation, that we want to hear as your needs and desires evolve. We want to hear that. So we're going to keep asking, and we hope that you stay engaged. If you have a question pop in your head later and are looking to have it answered, we do have a form that goes directly to our board of directors. We also have numerous, means of communication in terms of email addresses. We have a communications one. We all have email addresses as well, but that board email is a good one to just fill that out. That way your board member from your village, as well as the entire board, can see your questions and feedback as well and know what you're curious about. So seeing no more questions, I will give everybody, Joel has one more. Okay. Sorry, Joel, I'm just going to read it really quickly. So, Susan, I think this is a good question for you, and Joel, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit because I think it's important to put this in a little bit of a different perspective. So, we're asking about gifts, bequests, and what we would potentially call grants, Susan, to separate entities. So, our grants, how the board has kind of talked through that so far, and what we have maybe suggested, recommended so far in this process.
So I think I'm understanding Joel, your question. So Columbia Association's not been an active fundraiser for gifts or bequests, or and as most people know, we'd be delighted to and have received some bequests and gifts from individuals who are passionate about a particular program, for example, but we can't give them a tax deduction. So they don't get for it what most people who give are used to getting. So the way to do that would be through the community foundation, through a separate entity, like a Friends of kind of organization or directed to Inner Arbor. So there is, I wouldn't say there's a continuing reluctance. Let's say that's never been in our wheelhouse. We don't have that staff capability, but we would certainly be open to that. And we would encourage those other organizations that do have that ability to give a little bit of a reward to a giver, to a donor, to a tax deduction, to be more out there in the community and requesting those gifts. So.
Thank you for reading that correctly, Susan. I don't know what in my brain went to that. I think we've had a lot of conversation around grants and things like that. So I appreciate that. Well, hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for spending the last 50 minutes or so with us learning about this process. And hopefully you can take away some real importance and impact on your daily life. And yeah, we just appreciate your time so much and your engagement and look forward to more moving forward.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate your
Thank you
time.
all.
Thank you.